Today, we're diving into something every changemaker needs but often struggles with: how to market your mission effectively. I'm thrilled to welcome Eli Rubel, a Denver-based entrepreneur who's not just talking about marketing success, but living it. As the CEO of Mattermade and No Boring Design, Eli has helped countless organizations tell their stories better. What I love about Eli is his refreshing honesty about the challenges of building something meaningful. He's gone from museum director to tech entrepreneur, and now he's here to share his marketing wisdom with our nonprofit community. Get ready for some real talk about amplifying your impact. Welcome, Eli.
All right. Thanks for having me, Carina.
I'm so excited. We've had, I think, a couple years we've known each other, and I've been so impressed by your expertise in marketing, and you've helped me personally, and so I'm honored to have you on today. I would love to start with your interesting path from working in museums to becoming a tech entrepreneur. What sparked that transition, and how does your nonprofit background influence your approach to business today?
Wow, that's a great question. So I originally was a photographer way back in the day. I loved photography, went to photography school. And while I was at photography school, I was working on a project photographing and interviewing Holocaust survivors. And the project, I just became really obsessed with the project. And the dean of the school pulled me aside one day and was like, hey, you should work on this like more deeply than you are right now. Maybe take some time and pursue it. And I went down to LA. I was going to school in Santa Barbara. I went down to LA and walked into the Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust and was sitting in the waiting room, asked if I could speak with the executive director, just to show them the work that I was doing. And this guy who was making photocopies was like, well, tell me why you want to meet with him, and, blah, blah, blah. And fast forward 10 minutes, he goes, cool, you're talking with me. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. And so we ended up forming a partnership where I was able to raise funds to fund the project under their nonprofit status. And so that was kind of my entree into the world of nonprofits, and was still through this kind of art bend. Mm-hmm. Did that project full time for 2 years, pursued it for 2 years full time. And then I was waiting tables in Los Angeles and had what I call my quarter life crisis, where I was like, well, shoot, I love photography, but the type of photography that I want to do is very much not something that's going to give me this like stable financial situation in the future. I was very interested in like documentary style photography. And so I was either going to have to live off of grants for forever or figure something else out. And a buddy of mine gave me this book, The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. And I read it and was like, wait, I'm kind of a misfit like this Tim guy. I could figure this out, the internet, I'm young enough. And so started reading TechCrunch, some of these internet publications that were big at the time, and quit my job. I was waiting tables to pay the bills while I was working on this project, and moved into my mom's basement in Portland, Oregon, and said, I'm not leaving the basement until I've started a tech company. And that was my start in entrepreneurship.
You're incredibly open about the challenges of building businesses, because I watch your podcast and I'm so impressed by your vulnerability. Can you share a moment when everything felt impossible and how you pushed through?
Definitely. So in 2021, and by the way, there's so many, as I'm sure you've experienced through your career, like there's so many of these moments that you encounter as a leader that test you and really make you kind of question the depth of your resolve to move forward with something or whatnot. And so I'll just pick one of those examples somewhat recently, 2021. So in 2021, my marketing agency, Mattermade, was the biggest it had ever been. We'd had a pretty crazy growth curve from just me in 2019 to 40 people in 2021. And we felt like we were on top of the world. I was in conversations about selling the business. It was going to be this big deal. And the tech market collapsed, and all of our clients were tech companies. And so we went from doing, strong 7 figures in profit to losing $200,000 a month on payroll, pretty much overnight over the course of a couple of months. And so that was like just a very trying time for me. I think mostly because of the whiplash of having in my head that, I was succeeding in a certain way and that I had this path locked in and there's no chance that it was going to get messed up at this point, to then suddenly just being in a completely different place where I was starting from scratch and I, still had bills to pay in my life and suddenly didn't have a very profitable business. In fact, I was losing $200,000 a month. So, I think that was probably the most recent big challenge in my life where, I would go downstairs into our daughter's playpen and just cry randomly in the afternoons and try to like calm my nerves, and eventually gave myself the kind of the space and the grace to move through that time and build back up. And now that, the agency is doing really well again and we're growing again, but it was a good 2-year period where I was just having to grapple with that shift and that change and figure out how I wanted to show up during those times.
I love that. I know nonprofit leaders really struggle with having moments where everything's going wrong and just to stay focused on pushing forward. And I think you're a testament to that. And congrats on your success. It's really great. A lot of people who are entrepreneurs have failed multiple times and then ended up hitting it big. And so you learn something from each time that happens. So congrats again. So many nonprofits, as we talk about them, struggle with their limited marketing budgets. What are the most impactful marketing strategies that you've seen that require minimal resources?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that comes to mind is something that I know you and I have talked about in the past, which is, you think about nonprofits having this big database of donors that they've either been in contact with, maybe they've volunteered, maybe they've donated money, and then there's a spectrum within that. Maybe they've shown up once through corporate volunteering, maybe they show up every Saturday and give their afternoon, maybe they've donated $10 once, maybe they've donated $1 million over 10 years. Those people are all very different, and what they have to give and what they're interested in giving and the ways in which they can give are all very nuanced and different. And I think a lot of nonprofits, from what I've heard, tend to talk to them all in the same way, or have a hard, it's challenging, right, to segment them and come up with unique messaging for each of those audiences. And I think that's a huge miss at the end of the day, and a huge area for improvement that really doesn't cost much but time.
That's true.
If you think about, if you get one, you don't have one shot, but if you had one shot to go out and ask that pool of people for what you need from them or want from them, and you just asked all of them the same thing. So the person who donates $1 million over 10 years, you're like, if you could show up this Saturday for this toy drive that we're doing and, bring a toy and $10, like that would be a huge miss for that individual. And likewise, if you did the same thing, but inversed for the person who's been to one corporate event and never been back since, and you're like, listen, we're trying to raise $100,000 from 5 people, and we just think you'd be great for that. Like that would be a huge miss too.
Absolutely.
And it's not that one is more valuable than the other. I mean, I'm sure there's some preference there, but like they both have their path, right? And so I think as a nonprofit, the goal is how do we champion those paths, those journeys, so that we can get the person who's been to one corporate event to show up on their own for a weekend thing. And then we can get them to come to the annual gala, and then we can get them to donate their first $10 and then $100 and then $1,000, and then get them to bring some friends. And maybe it's, for the big donor, it's how do we get them to bring their colleagues, their board members, their whatever. So I think back to your question on what's the low cost way to drive big impact with marketing. I think it's about segmentation of your audience, segmentation of your messaging to match that audience, and then having really clear paths that you're moving people through, with that messaging.
How best would you go about doing something like that?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first step is the data has to be clean, which is usually the hardest step.
True.
In a vacuum, it sounds pretty straightforward to do everything that I'm talking about. In practice, it can be very challenging. So yeah, the first step is having a CRM of some sort that you can put people into cohorts, whether that's through tags or usually it's going to be like, it's different for every CRM, but generally it's going to be a tagging system where you say
an attribute or something.
Attribute. Yeah, exactly. Some way of saying this person belongs in this group. This person belongs in this group. And you can see historically like what their path has been within the CRM. And then once you have people tagged in that way, and that to me, that project is, you need someone with historical knowledge of, who's who within the database. And then you need someone technical enough to know how to tag in those attributes and organize the data. That doesn't have to be this Herculean effort though. I mean, this could be lock one of each of those people in a room for a week and say, this is the only thing that you're working on right now. And I bet you at the end of the week, it would be done. A lot of the time those projects fall off the rails because you chip away at it 30 minutes to an hour at a time. And it takes 30 minutes just to remember where you left off a lot of the time with these technical things. And so, I think just if you can, the kind of the cheat code is get the key stakeholders and tell them this is the only thing you're working on until it's done. And it'll get done so much faster and so much better at the end of the day. Once you have the database, the next part becomes a bit more fun than the database step, which is writing the personalized messaging. So, and actually, I would take a step back before that. Before that, I would want to write out the paths that someone could grow within the organization. So like I mentioned earlier, what is the path for someone who just volunteered once through a corporate event, taking that next step? What are their next 3 steps? What are the next 5 steps? And doing that for each of the people in each of the cohorts, doing that for each of the cohorts. So you know how someone moves up, you know how someone moves backwards. And then from there, you can write the messaging to speak to each of them. And the messaging can be like, how do we activate them where they are today? But then the messaging can also be, how do we activate them into that next step?
So would the messaging be by way of newsletter, emails? It would be like a drip campaign of like at certain times, like at 2 weeks later, you do another one. And like, how does that work best?
Yeah. So you can think of it as like, we have our audience or audiences. We have our path that we want to move them through. We have our messaging. Now we have to pick our channels, and channels can be anything from sending them an email or an email sequence. It could be a newsletter. It could be inviting them to an event. It could be a phone call. It could be a variety of things. And each stage or each cohort is going to be more or less receptive to certain things, right? You wouldn't want to hound the person who's only been to one corporate event with a series of 3 phone calls and 5 emails and inviting them to all the things because they're like, whoa, I just showed up once through my employer. Like, I don't even really know what this is about. So for them, it might be, sending them an email and asking if they want to subscribe to this newsletter where they can stay up to date with the happenings, just like what they participated in, something like that. Whereas for, the big donors, it's probably not making sense to send them a sequence of emails. It's probably more so like, we need to flag this person and have someone call them on the phone, have a conversation with them and really deeply understand their giving plans for this year, for the next 5 years. And then in between, maybe it's where you can get heavier with, get them onto the newsletter, invite them to an event, and then send them the sequence of, fundraising emails or something like that. And then maybe they get one personalized phone call every year, every quarter, or whatever it is. So audience segmentation, then we have the journey of how people move through those segments. Then we have the messaging itself, and then we have the channels.
It's brilliant. I love that so much. And I think that is a huge win when it comes to a nonprofit. And I would say majority of nonprofits aren't doing that at this point in time. And so thank you for that. That's really, really great advice. You've also advised companies like Dropbox and Loom. How can nonprofits apply big tech marketing strategies to their missions?
So I love that question. And the reason I'm smiling is because usually the things that are most impactful for these big on the bleeding edge tech companies is going back to the foundational things that they lost sight of along the way. So, when we were advising Dropbox or advising Loom, a lot of it was helping them go back to these foundational things that they skipped past. And they were getting, it's easy to get distracted by shiny and easy to get distracted by fancy tooling that promises you the world. But if, for example, your messaging isn't aligned well to the person that you're sending the message to, it doesn't matter if you're using the fanciest tooling or big tech, whatever, because the message is going to fall flat when it lands with that person. So, I actually think the answer is go back to the basics in order to be like the best of the big tech players.
That's makes a lot of sense. The CRM system that I used, we used probably 10% of its functionality because we really were more about relationships versus transaction. And I think, that's such a critical piece when it's coming to engaging your audience and people and getting them excited about your mission is making it be authentic and have it be a true relationship and not about all the gadgets. Although thinking of one of the most recent things that is out there that is an amazing tool, how do you think AI could help nonprofits?
I think AI will be huge for nonprofits, especially in figuring out how to deploy and orchestrate a lot of the things that I described already. A lot of these marketing tactics and just ideas, because AI is very good at kind of holding someone's hand as long as that person knows what questions to ask. So if the person knows, hey, I need to, hey, ChatGPT, I need to segment my donor base by type. Help me figure out how to do that. And then ChatGPT from there can ask these leading questions where it's like, okay, well, what's your biggest donor look like? What's your smallest donor look like? And you can have it interview you and start to unpack these things that otherwise you'd be working with a, marketing agency and paying them their fee to do something like that. And, having your team have to book meetings. And it's a shortcut, I think, to 80-20 a lot of things. You're not going to get like the most polished perfect, but a lot of the time that's not even what organizations should be aiming for. It's just like, let's get it done well enough to move on to the next thing that's going to have a big impact.
It's true. And yeah, and ChatGPT even writes up the letters or the marketing things that you're talking about that would get out at certain points and times to the different segmentation of the audience. And so I'm really excited about what it's like having an additional employee on your team when you can't afford another employee on your team. So with that being said, I'm thinking about, nonprofits that have either a small marketing team or no marketing team. What's your thought on outsourcing marketing? Because in my opinion, you get expertise in all areas from outsourcing a marketing firm versus having people in that you have to manage and you have to, hope that they know how to use spell check. That was my biggest pet peeve, honestly.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. I think at the end of the day, and I'm a biased individual here because I have a marketing agency, but I think that there's a lot to be said for the cohesion of a team that's worked together before and solved problems before together. And you get that when you work with a marketing agency, right? They have these teams who have seen so many different problems across so many different organizations. And that's the other benefit is usually when you're hiring an individual, they have spent the last 2-3 years on average for, call it a younger employee, bouncing between different companies, nonprofits, what have you. So they're seeing maybe they've seen 2, 3, 4 problem sets before. And then they're stuck in that same problem set for 2 to 3 years until they switch. Whereas with an agency, maybe this team has a book of business of 7 clients at any given time, so they're seeing patterns in what works and what doesn't. And, hey, we ended up wasting a ton of time with these 3 engagements because we did this thing in a certain way. Let's not waste that time with our next client. So you get a lot of efficiencies in working with a team that has done this over and over and over again, and knows how to work effectively as a group. And for me personally, I do this for my businesses too. I would much rather outsource something to a trusted team than have to manage and, take that head count on myself. Because, as I mentioned in that opening story where I had a 40-person agency, we went from 40 people to 5. And that was the most painful point in my career. I don't ever want to have to repeat that. And so that's one of the benefits of bringing in these agencies is it's not the end of the world if you say, hey, you know what, we lost our budget, or hey, we need to pause this for 6 months or whatever it is. Like, that's not the same thing as sitting down with each one of those people in a one-on-one and telling them that their job just got dissolved. So
yeah, absolutely. And I definitely feel like outsourcing as a nonprofit, you can save a lot of money and a lot of headache. And so I appreciate that you offer that to nonprofits, and excited. I believe that you're planning on expanding that in your business. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
yeah, absolutely. So I'll keep coming back to that story you asked me about earlier, because there are a lot of great things that came from that time too. While I was going back to 2021, the crash came and I was in this kind of depressed state. And I'm a creative person, so I needed some sort of creative outlet during this time, because otherwise I was sitting on my hands and kind of waiting for the market to come back. And so I developed this hypothesis that because the market was bad, and I'm talking about the tech market, but because the tech market was bad, I believed that a lot of folks in creative fields like design, copywriting, et cetera, would lose their jobs as a result. And then these companies would, 3-6 months from now realize, well, shoot, there's a reason we had those people employed and we still need that work, but they'd be in a hiring freeze. And so this led me to create my second agency called No Boring Design, where we wanted to be this really flexible, on-demand design team that organizations can plug into, whether they need a full-on new brand identity that's going to connect with their audience in a more meaningfully profound way, or they need flyers for the next newsletter or the next banquet or place settings. Like, there's so many things that need to be visually designed, both digital and print. And so through this kind of really dark time came this really bright thing, which was the creative act of birthing this new company. And so for the first 3 years that business has been around, we were focused on the tech companies that I was used to selling to. But what we realized was, we really wanted to move away from that and move towards supporting mission-driven businesses or mission-driven organizations, and having our work have more of an impact than bringing in dollars. But maybe it still brings in dollars, but in the form of donations and not in the form of capitalism, whatever. So our new big charter is we're transitioning away from tech and focusing on serving these mission-driven organizations, helping them with all of their design needs on demand.
Well, I know you're going to be amazing because you were for me, and it was, just a blessing to our organization, the advice that you had given us. And obviously I know that you believe in giving back and being mission focused, because you were one of my biggest donors. So I had to put that plug in there. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And so I'd highly encourage anyone who is looking for a really, really class act human being to be on their team and get his team involved. I'd highly recommend them reaching out to you. And at the end, we can talk about how they can go about that. But really, want to talk about nonprofits, and the best way for fundraising is storytelling. It's really at the heart of great marketing. So when thinking about that, what are the key ingredients of a compelling nonprofit brand story? And how can organization ensure their messaging is both authentic and persuasive?
So brand identity, brand story, brand voice, obviously kind of one of the most important things to get a group of people to engage with your cause. I like to take a really simple approach here, which is just to ask the fundamental question, why, over and over again. And that's not like rocket science. It's something that people use as a tactic.
It's like the five whys.
Exactly.
Or something.
It's exactly that, like why should someone care about that? And I think it sounds silly many times because you'll be like, well, what do you mean? Why should people care about children being fed? Like, of course, like, duh. But a lot of the time, the nuances that you'll uncover by still asking that question, even when it seems obvious or uncomfortable, you get to the kind of the core kernel of what makes someone care or what makes someone take an action. And you can do this at all different facets of your messaging. So you can do this in the foundational stage when you're figuring out, okay, how do we want to talk about our mission and our values and these sorts of things? And you can ask why multiple times to kind of really unpack that. But then you could also do the same thing if we go back to the example of we're writing email copy for a sequence that's going to go out to someone who's visited once as a corporate participant. Like, well, why should they care about showing up on a Saturday now when they've been once? Okay, and then why? Like, what impact is this going to have on their lives? And so you can go through these why and what questions back and forth until you get just down to the very core of something that's going to make someone take action that you want them to take.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So when you're thinking about the competitiveness, which really is friendly competition for nonprofits, but Colorado alone has so many nonprofits and they're all competing for the same funds. What is a way that they could stand out?
I think a big part of this is putting the results at the forefront. You go to a lot of nonprofits. Actually, rather than speaking in hypotheticals, I'll use the exact story of how I found A Precious Child and how we got connected in the first place, which was my wife and I had just moved to Colorado. I grew up here, but we had been away for a long time. And we had never lived in Denver before, and we knew we wanted to get involved with some nonprofits here, and we knew that giving was a central part of our family philosophy. But we had no idea like what organizations were out there, and so it literally started off with my wife and I going to coffee shops and just Googling, nonprofits Denver, and then you like, well, this sucks. Like the search results aren't very helpful. It's a mess. There's so many options. Okay, nonprofit ranking platform, you're just like kind of cobbling these searches together, trying to find, okay, now I'm on a website like Charity GuideStar or Charity Navigator or some of these like aggregators. And I'm looking, and even that's kind of confusing. So then at the end of the day, I just came to one of these websites that had a bunch of Denver nonprofits listed, and I just started clicking and opening their websites because I couldn't get enough information from the aggregated view. And so now I'm on their websites, and your website was one of them. And there were so many that, first off, and I'm a little bit biased because I have a design agency and come from a creative background. But for me, if I go to a website and like the website itself is just old and doesn't do a good job of clearly communicating in a cohesive way what this organization is about, I close the tab right away just because I'm like, well, if their website looks like this, how are they running their organization?
I do the same thing for-profit businesses.
Yeah, exactly. I like totally read into it, and maybe they run an amazing organization, but for my archetype, they've shot themselves in the foot by not having this, in a kind of modern professional light from the get-go. So that's kind of the first thing. Then the second thing is, and almost more important, but you have to have that first buy-in in order to keep them on the site long enough to get to the second piece, is putting the results of what you do at the front and center. And I think A Precious Child has done such a wonderful job of telling these stories of impact and illustrating through storytelling, visuals, video, all sorts of multimedia, exactly what it is that engaging with your organization does. What does it mean? What does it mean for this person? What does it mean for our community? What does it mean for our city? That's so much more impactful than just seeing a mission statement that's like, we seek to make sure that no child is ever left hungry or without clothes. Like, well, a lot of organizations have important missions like that and sound very similar when they talk about them. But when I can instead look at, here is the name of a person and the face of a person who, well, like I remember I was, when I first met you and we were touring the facility, there was some family who had been displaced by a fire in their apartment building. They slept in their car that night, and they were at the warehouse going shopping and getting clothing for their family and replacing some of these essential supplies and getting help from folks there who were giving them like resources that they could call and get in touch with. And like that, even talking about it, I get emotional just thinking about that one instance.
I remember it well.
And you have so many of those, thousands of these stories. And so that's how you get someone to care, and that's how you stand out, I think, as opposed to just saying, because you could have said, imagine that message, but if you strip away the story of it and you're just like, we help families when they're in need with critical supplies or whatever, like, yes, that's important, but it didn't engage me. And so I think storytelling, like time over time is critical.
Where's the best ways to storytell? Like when you think of all the marketing platforms and you think of like, you've got Facebook and you got LinkedIn and Instagram, and then you have your email that you send out, newsletters, and then obviously you can do the tours, but some organizations don't have a facility to give tours.
Yes. I mean, I think you want to be able to transport an individual who's on your website as quickly as possible into the state of receiving these stories. And so, pardon me. And so I think video is a fantastic, probably the best tool for this. Photographs are great, but really video, you're getting the story, you're getting the narrative, you're getting the sense for the person and their emotional state, and you're getting a sense for the team that's helping deliver these, these solutions or these opportunities to folks, depending on your cause. And so I think video at the end of the day is the most one-to-many, because you're right, you can only take so many in-person tours, and have an impact. You're limited with time. But with video, if you can really concisely and with a bunch of emotion capture these stories, then you can go out to all sorts of different channels and disperse them. And so, like, again, it goes back to now our medium, instead of being written copy like it was when we talked about engaging with donors earlier, is, our medium is video, and our channels can be wherever those folks are. It could be, let's send this video out in our next newsletter. Let's show this video at our gala, which you guys were so amazing at doing. Let's run Facebook ads to reach new folks who have never engaged with us before, and get them to feel the feelings really quickly through these videos, and they get familiar with us that way.
So do you think it's worth it for a nonprofit to spend marketing dollars on Facebook ads?
I will put it this way. Almost every for-profit company, almost every modern for-profit company today does that to get business. It might not be Facebook. It might be Facebook for some. It might be LinkedIn for others. It might be an, ad affiliate network. It really is more about like who are you going after as an audience, and where do they spend their time, and then paying to be on those channels with your content. But I think if something's working for capitalistic endeavors like for-profit organizations, then there's no reason why it wouldn't work for nonprofits as well. And it's probably a good sign if folks have never thought about that before, that this is a huge playground to go expand their reach. Yeah.
And I think Facebook also really targets people that are a little bit older and probably have some wealth. as well. So I think it would be really good. About Instagram, I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm 55, and it's beyond me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel that way about TikTok even now. So I think that it just keeps rolling, keeps changing, and keeping up with it can be hard. But yeah, certainly Facebook for a donor base that can have some real spending power.
So when thinking about growth and many nonprofit leaders feel really overwhelmed by the pressures to constantly grow their reach and their donor base. How do you recommend they prioritize their marketing efforts for the maximum impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on some of these core pillars already. To me, it's like if you aren't clear with who you're speaking to and how you're speaking to them, like don't do anything else. Just get good at that. Because the impact there is going to be huge, and it's not going to cost much to dial that in. And then once you have that dialed in, it's just a question of where do you want to point your megaphone? And the megaphone is the channel, right? So maybe the channel is newsletter. Great. We're going to point that megaphone towards our subscriber base. Or maybe that megaphone is Facebook, and we're going to grow our subscriber base by, pointing the megaphone there. So I think just simplifying it down. And you asked a question earlier that I didn't have a good answer to, which was mistakes. But now that I'm thinking about it, I think one of the mistakes folks make is overcomplicating things. I mentioned this, even further back when I said, the big Fortune 500s, like what are the things that they're doing? One of the mistakes they're making is getting too in the weeds with too many tools and too many even team members that they lose sight of the most important things and the most fundamental things, and they lose the rigor that they once had that got them to the place that they are now today. So I think just simplifying it down to clean audience, clean message, and then take your megaphone and figure out where you want to point it is going to have a profound impact for most organizations.
Brilliant. I love that. So obviously there's when you could get in the weeds, but I also think that there's some benefits to looking at the data. So you can look at your website and you can see who's, what type of people are coming and seeing it. And then as well, when you do the Facebook ads, I believe that you can also have some analytics. So with that, how can organizations use metrics to refine their strategies without getting lost in that analysis paralysis?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think this is where agencies can be really helpful, because some of the stuff I'm about to say would overwhelm an in-house team if they weren't like really seasoned. So if if you're an organization that just hired a marketing manager who's kind of like an intern level, or maybe this is their first job, the things that I'm about to say would be hard for them not to get lost in, likely. I think that one of the really profound ways that you can use data it's not usually the most thought of use case for leveraging data is running experiments to test new messaging or to test new audiences. And so most people think about, okay, I'm going to go run Facebook ads to capture more of this audience that I already know really well. And like, that's where we're seeing success today with a message that we already know works. Like, that's great until you kind of run dry with that group, or until you've hit kind of this point of, well, we can only advertise to them or send them messages so many times before, we're going to start to push them away. And so then the question is, well, where do we go next? And so running ads and looking at the data is a really great way to say, okay, let's come up with our 5 best hypotheses about who else we might be able to go after. What do they look like? What are the, firmographics, demographics? And then go to Facebook and run experiments where you give it a very limited budget. You say, okay, we're going to spend $1,000 on each one of these audiences. And then we're going to use the same messaging as a control. And then we're just going to see like where was our highest engagement rate amongst those 5. And then boom, now you went from, we don't know who to go after next, to now at least in stack rank, this audience is the most likely to engage with our content. Then it's this one, then it's this one, this one. And it only cost $5,000 to glean something that you might have, the alternative to that is you make a hypothesis and you dedicate a year to chasing that hypothesis. You're like, oh, well, we just believe that this is the right audience. But if you, at the end of the year, learn, well, turns out our message didn't really resonate and we're going to have to come up with a new group to focus on. Well, you could have spent $5,000 and in 2 weeks come around to a similar takeaway. Mm-hmm. And then you can do that for all of the different elements within the marketing motion. So that was just the audience step. But then, okay, great. Let's say that we've whittled it down to 3. Well, actually, for simplicity's sake, let's say we whittled it down to our number one audience, the one that responded the best to that messaging. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing, but for messaging. We're going to have our 5 best message hypotheses for that audience. Maybe we think that people are going to take action if we tell an emotional, heartfelt story. That's a hypothesis. Maybe we think people will take action if they hear statistics that are very analytical in nature. That's another hypothesis. And so you'd come up with several different hypotheses and then run the same experiment, but instead of testing audience, you're just with one audience. That's your control now. And you're testing 5 different messages. And then for another $5,000, you've figured out exactly how to communicate to that audience. And now you can go take your actual budget and say, okay, this is our audience. This is our message. And now we're going to grow our reach.
So what are you looking for when you say engagement from them? Is that meaning they're liking it, they're commenting, or they're actually donating? You kind of use all those metrics?
So that would be I would consider that to be another experiment that you would run, because there might be audiences that you're really successful in getting engagement with in the form of likes, comments, views, but they never go to your website and they never donate. And then you might have others that have lower engagement in the form of likes, comments, and views, but they're just jumping to the website and they're making a donation right away. And so that's another kind of dimension to consider for sure. That's really critical. And I would just take that as another test. So once you've whittled it down, then run an experiment where you say, okay, which of these groups or which of these message sets drives people to take the most desirable action for us? And that will be different, I think, for every organization. Some might be looking for an immediate, $5 donation. Others might be looking for them to subscribe to the newsletter so they have permission to show them all the great work and get them to do make $1,000 donation or whatever it is. So, yeah.
That's great. So, I know, a lot of organizations use influencers to get their brand out. What's your thought on leveraging influencers, such as, an NFL player, or, it could be somebody who is just a social media influencer? Is there any advice on that?
Yeah. I mean, I absolutely love influencer marketing. I love it for for-profits. I love it for nonprofits. I think it's just all around an amazing tool that's underutilized by most. And it's brilliant because you can work with the big celebrity folks like the NFL stars or whatever it is. And especially as a nonprofit, it's going to be easier to get them to be willing to engage with your message and be a champion of it than if you're a for-profit company. They're like, great, give me $10 million and I'll talk about your deodorant brand on
right.
whatever it is. But I wouldn't underestimate, though, the smaller, non-celebrity influencers as a fantastic channel, because it comes back to audience fit, right? Maybe the NFL player has a bunch of folks out there across all walks of life who keep tabs on them generally and pay attention to what they're doing. But then let's say you have pick a random example. Let's say that you have a woman who is in her late 40s and she has a blog and a following around some hobby of hers. And her audience is a group of women in their mid late 40s who are super engaged with that time of life. And so if you can go to them through her with a message that aligns with your donor base of women who are in their mid to late 40s, very concise and tight message, you might be able to engage 80% of them and have them feel something, remember something and engage with something in a meaningful way for you, than that NFL star who maybe like a bunch of people are like, oh, that's nice that's nice that this person is doing this thing, but it doesn't touch them in the same way as like my bestie on, Instagram that I follow, who normally I follow about whatever hobby it is we're talking about. Wow, I just love that she's involved with this organization. I didn't know they existed before, and I feel so passionate to take action.
That makes so much sense when I think about how I started, right? It was in my neighborhood. And then it was somebody introduced me to a gal who had a lot of influence on a lot of women, and then got them engaged. And then those women got more women engaged. And so it's really, you don't have to be shooting for the moon. You don't have to get, Robert De Niro or something like that, in order to be seen. You can go after, if it's specifically for children, you can go after influencers of moms, right, that are talking about products for their kids, or, teachings about kids. And so I think that's a really, really aha moment for me and a big takeaway. And I love that. How do you personally stay inspired and creative in the ever-changing marketing world? And how can nonprofit leaders do the same?
My inspiration comes from the people that I work with, much more so than the things like the medium or the things that we're doing. I think that's probably a less common answer. Like, it's not that I don't get energy from marketing. I get energy from working with young, talented people, or just new people who are new to me. I've never met them before, and I hire them, and I get to be a champion of their career. And, I get to draft off of their enthusiasm, their energy, and learn new things from them. So I think for me, that's what gives me energy, less so the new things that are happening in the industry. And it's funny because I've had friends and on other podcasts, people ask, what's your favorite, who do you follow? What's your favorite this or that? And I'm not very, I think this is maybe a character flaw of mine, but I don't actually pay much attention outwardly. I've kind of have my blinders on, and I'm just doing my work. Sometimes to my own deficit or whatever. I don't know. It's not a not a great character trait, but You've been really, really helpful today, and I'm really hopeful that you'll come back on again and continue with a series for this, because I think this is so critical for nonprofit leaders and people that are, trying to get their mission out there front and forward. And I think you have given so many amazing takeaways. But what if they want to reach out to you and learn from you specifically, or hire your organization? Where should they go, and who should they reach out to? Yeah, absolutely. So happy to chat with people if they reach out to me on LinkedIn, Eli Rubel on LinkedIn. And if they're interested in No Boring Design, that design agency that we talked about, they can go to noboringdesign.com and reach out there. And my marketing agency is mattermade.co. Those are the three best ways to get in touch. I love it. I would highly recommend people to take them up on that, because I think outsourcing marketing is a gift to nonprofits. It really does help take a lot of stress and burden off of a leader of a nonprofit. And you are a huge help to me, and I appreciate you so much. So thank you for being here today. This was fun. Yes, it was. Thanks for having me. Thank you for joining us today on Empower Hour. I hope you're leaving with fresh inspiration and practical insights to fuel your work. Remember, every challenge you face is a stepping stone towards impact. If you found this episode helpful, please follow us and share it with others. Keep making a difference and lifting others up. And I'll see you next time.